Okay, guys, I've waited for the next diversion and all of the reports about the Black Hawk helicopter that crashed into a regional American Airlines, and nothing has convinced me that my original suspicions are not accurate. In fact, I'm glad I waited because there are some additional thoughts that should be looked into. So let's go on a little investigation with what we are being told. I used to love putting the pieces of a puzzle together. One thing to remember that everything I tell you has been verified as much as possible in this short time. Investigations sometimes take years. I was on one for 12 years before the man came to full justice. When people hide things, it makes it hard. So I want you to remember that I present these facts as I know them, so that you have as many pieces of the puzzle as possible as you reach inside and ask for the truth. Regardless of what we find or don't find, we must vibrate in love for the human beings that lost their lives in this biblical war. We have been told that a Black Hawk helicopter collided with an American Airlines regional passenger plane, number 5342, flying from Wichita, Kansas, in Washington, D.C., near the Reagan Airport. There were 64 souls on board the plane, and another 3 on board the Army Black Hawk helicopter. Both aircraft fell into the Potomac River, and no survivors are expected after this mid-air collision. There were 28 skaters and others in the community on board the plane that crashed, along with 2 Chinese citizens, 3 Russian nationals, and a Philippine police officer. At least 55 bodies of the deceased have been pulled from the river so far. While the manifest has not been released, the TASS news agency in Russia announced early on that 2 Russian figure skaters were on board the plane that crashed, and the media went wild with conspiracy theories about someone offing the Russians. Guys, the Russian lies are done. Don't believe them. These were wholesome families traveling together to support their kids in skating. My parents did the same things for 2 of my sisters, and while they enjoyed the travel, it was very difficult on their finances. My parents sacrificed, and I'm sure these kids' parents did too, and every victim had a family somewhere who loved them. Always remember that. So originally I began to focus on the skaters, but then realized that nobody was focusing on the Black Hawk and how much the deep state really has at stake. I also began to find some things that made me consider the possibility that the focus should be on the helicopter. My heart is broken for the loss of these innocent lives, and my intent would never be to harm them. But the fact is that other unusual events like this have happened. We know there is an unseen war going on, and that deep state operatives are desperately trying to destroy all witnesses and evidence. So I went in a little different direction and focused on the Army helicopter. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter with the call sign PAT-25. It departed Fort Belvoir, Virginia, reportedly on a training exercise at 8:39 p.m. in the dark. It's not been disclosed whether this was an elite gold-topped Hawk or not. This is important because the non-gold-top UH-60s transport VIP and senior military. The gold tops are typically reserved for more visible VIP transport, while non-gold tops may be used for lower profile movements. So you want to look for photos of the top in wreckage photos. The U.S. Army primarily operates the UH-60 Black Hawks, which are equipped for tactical transport and configured for secure transport missions. The Army uses these elite helicopters for transporting Washington's power players, equipment, and sensitive assets in both combat and non-combat situations. The configuration is a specialized setup for protecting the transport of high-priority assets or personnel. So remember what these helicopters are designed to do. Now let's look at the tower and the communication between the Black Hawk and the air traffic control tower. There are different audios. One, you can hear the tower ask the Black Hawk or PAT-25 pilot if it had the American Airlines plane in sight. At 8:48 and 38 seconds, the helicopter confirmed seeing the plane and requested visual separation, which means that the Black Hawk pilot is taking responsibility for maintaining a safe distance from other aircraft using visual flight rules, or VFR. It also is telling the tower to rely on the pilot's visual navigation rather than radar or other electronic systems. Just 18 seconds later, the helicopter hit the jet at an altitude of 325 feet. FAA rules require helicopters in that area to stay below 200 feet. The next sound was from another plane in the air asking the tower, "Did you see that?" Some audio stopped there, but there's a continuation where we hear the name of the copter, which is Blackjack 3 with call sign Pat 25. The recording reveals the ground team frantically saying to come back to base, which was 15 miles away, then asking the pilot if he could stop at Dulles and then switching to Baltimore. The communication only has one side, which is the tower or other controller. You cannot hear the pilot when being told to land. While online pilots have come on making a differentiation between analog and digital recordings, but it's suspicious to me that they have chosen to release a copy where you can't hear the pilot. One part that you can hear is the Pat 25 pilot requesting visual separation. On other part of the recording, you can hear the tower calling it Blackjack 3, and they wanted him out of the sky, requesting him to return immediately to base. The pilot does not respond, or it's been redacted. Then the tower asks if they can land at Dulles Airport for a few minutes, which was approximately 26 miles away. Then, after another period of silence, the voice asks if they can go to Baltimore, which was 43 miles away. Why did the tower want the Black Hawk down at the nearest airport? I say there was an important asset on it that they had to get out of Dodge another way. Bear with me. This shifting around before the Black Hawk clearly smashed into the jet is the most puzzling portion of the various communications, which will be linked in the description. The Black Hawk allegedly took off from Davison Army Airfield for a training mission. So why wasn't the pilot able to return to base just 15 miles away? Something's not right, and we're not getting the answers that explain it adequately yet. Also, at first, it seems to be a command to go to base, and then it becomes more of a question of can they land at these airports. A very odd conversation when you put it in context.
Blackjack 3, can you return to base? What? Blackjack 3, proceed directly to Glebe. I need you to land. I need you to land immediately. Can you go to Dulles for a few minutes? Also 7, proceed due westbound. Contact Dulles Tower 120.1. Muscle 13, can you go to Baltimore?
Next, let's look at the pilots on board the Black Hawk. Two of those on board, the pilot and the co-pilot, were immediately identified as Staff Sergeant Ryan Austin O'Hara, 28, and Chief Warrant Officer Andrew Lloyd Eves, 39. The third person in the Black Hawk was not identified for some time, and when she was, the third pilot was released as Joe Ellis, a Virginia National Guard soldier for 15 years who transitioned in the military in 2023. But it gets better. Joe Ellis came out publicly on her Facebook as proof of life that she was not in the helicopter, and this was confirmed by the National Guard that they had nobody on it. Then the plot thickened when the Army released the third pilot as a gay woman named Captain Rebecca M. Loback from Durham, North Carolina. Then it was uncovered that Captain Loback recently served as Biden White House aide as recently as January 4th, escorting Ralph Lauren from receiving his Presidential Medal of Freedom. For what, I don't know. Anyway, since the accident, all of her numerous social media accounts have been scrubbed, so just an observation. The black boxes have all apparently been recovered, but we don't know anything about what's on them yet. The Army has confirmed that all 3 soldiers belong to Bravo Company, 12th Combat Aviation Battalion, stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, approximately 20 miles south of Washington, D.C. This unit is primarily responsible for transporting senior U.S. military officials within the Washington area and beyond, though the Blackhawks are also used for training. Unified Command held a press conference on Sunday afternoon updating the recovery efforts. During aircraft salvage, additional remains were removed, and so far, 55 of the 67 victims have been positively identified from the accident. They also explained that this particular unit supplies support for governmental agencies throughout the U.S. They fly the routes continuously, and they aren't just military helicopter routes. They are routes for almost 30 agencies and law enforcement organizations that fly those routes. While they did mention the training mission, the Joint Command let us know that numerous federal agencies, including law enforcement, can use the Pat Blackhawks. When he talked about the so-called training mission, he spoke of 2 experienced pilots. He didn't say anything about the 3rd soldier, which I found odd. An Army Flight Safety Investigative Team from the Army's Combat Readiness Center at Fort Novosel, Alabama, has arrived in Washington to assist the National Transportation Safety Board with its investigation. Nobody in the media is talking about the fact that the call sign on the Army copter was PAT 25, which means Priority Air Transport. In fact, nobody is talking much about this crash since there was a subsequent medical plane that crashed in Philadelphia. Then there were 2 or 3 other small plane crashes in the news. That's how distraction occurs. This is why I think we should be looking at who was being transported out of a D.C. airport in a Black Hawk under the cover of darkness. Something is not right. Flight Alert shows that Pat 25 landed over 2 weeks ago, Saturday the 18th, and has not recorded a flight since. So who was the 3rd person or priority transport if there was one? Those of you who remember the old days will remember the predictions of Gitmo expansions. President Trump just announced 30,000 more spaces at Gitmo. Coincidence? You tell me. The Black Hawk left from Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which is a major U.S. Army installation located in Fairfax County near Washington, D.C. It hosts several key military and intelligence agencies, including the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, a key center for satellite and geospatial intelligence, the Defense Logistics Agency, or DLA, which supports military logistics and supply chain management, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, or INSCOM, which handles intelligence operations, the Missile Defense Agency, or MDA, which focuses on missile defense research and development, the Defense Acquisition University, or DAU, which provides training for military procurement, and the U.S. Army Cyber Command, or RCyber, which is involved in cybersecurity operations. Fort Belvoir plays a significant role in national security and defense research, but there's still more to come out, and we won't find it in the news. The talking heads in the mainstream media are now trying to turn this into some DEI issue, saying that DEI may be the cause of inept pilots or traffic controllers. We always look beyond what they are voluntarily telling us. It's often a distraction. The investigation of this tragedy is being handled by the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, which is an allegedly independent investigative board, meaning that Congress allocates funding for it through the federal budget. They have no regulatory or enforcement powers. There's a couple of things of note. The board consists of 5 members appointed by the President of the United States. Whenever I hear about government investigations, I always want to know more about the ones doing the investigation rather than just blindly assuming that they are not controlled by the deep state in some form. Sometimes they don't even know it. So let's take a look at the current NTSB board for your consideration. Jennifer Homendy is the chairman of the NTSB board. She joined the board in 2018 under President Trump and then was appointed chairman by Joseph Biden. She remains in the position under Trump. The other 4 board members include Alvin Brown, who was a Democratic mayor appointed by Joe Biden in March 2024, Michael Graham, a Republican appointed by President Trump the first term. He was a naval aviator and spent 22 years with Textron Aviation investigating plane crashes. Next is Thomas B. Chapman, also appointed by President Trump in 2020 and he was previously a lawyer for the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation and Space. Lastly is J. Todd Inman, appointed by Joseph Biden in March of 2024. He's one of the newest members, but has been acting as the main spokesperson. He has a bachelor's degree in journalism and advertising. The Biden administration left 8 vacancies with the Federal Aviation Administration. Christopher Rocheleau is Trump's newly appointed administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. Biden's FAA administrator quit when Trump came into office. He also signed a presidential memorandum titled Immediate Assessment of Aviation Safety. The memorandum orders the Secretary of Transportation and the acting FAA administrator to undo the damage of the Biden woke DEI policies, stating that the tragedy of these lost lives will serve to save many others. Apparently, DEI policies caused the shortages because white candidates were denied positions while there weren't enough diverse candidates to fill the openings. So it looks like POTUS is on top of this, but we must let the deep state know that their lies and destruction of evidence isn't going to stand much longer. Something else to be considered is that numerous aviation people have come out and said it's nearly impossible for a Black Hawk to crash into an airplane for a couple of reasons. First, the maneuverability is such that it could drop or otherwise quickly maneuver to avoid a crash. Secondly, it's possible that the plane could be operated completely autonomously. However, defense officials have come out and said that the Black Hawk U-60M did not have experimental autonomous flight capabilities. So do we believe them? Not yet. I'd need to know a lot more about the circumstances of this fatal crash. We do know now, though, that the U-60M Black Hawk is an upgraded version of the UH-60 series, featuring advanced avionics, improved engines, and enhanced durability. It also has enhanced survivability equipment, which consists of various additional alarms and sensors. Technically, we won't ever know if there was even anybody in the Black Hawk, but I'm assuming there was. But even if the pilot was autonomously disabled, could the base have taken over control and avoided that crash with available equipment? If it wasn't, then what caused those pilots to crash into the plane? So tell me, what do you think is going on? What I presented were some investigative findings from what we are being told and what is available in the records. As mentioned, it can take a long time to put enough pieces together to come to a conclusion and even more to prosecute. So let's give them a little time. To me, I'm considering the following scenario: that there was a government transport on that plane that could testify against the deep state, perhaps going to Gitmo. For some reason, the Black Hawk flew right into the American Airlines jet. We know the following possibilities exist: that there was a traitor on the plane who went on a kamikaze mission. I doubt it, but who knows? That the pilots were disabled by something such as a gas when the pilot requested visual separation. Possibly, but the gas could be found on autopsy. And the third one I thought of was that somebody within the deep state hacked into the navigation system of the Black Hawk and flew it into the airliner. This seems the most likely to me, especially the rather frantic sound of the tower requesting the BU-60 land immediately, as if they just learned they lost control. Don't know, guys. There's so much going on out there that I wish I could follow this one non-stop because we lost so much. Also, notice how President Trump used this tragic strike by the deep state against them by removing the horrible DEI agendas and hiring policies of the Biden administration. But I want you to understand how the battles of this war are won and lost. In addition to those innocent souls, we could have lost a witness against the deep state. Time will tell on this one, but things are looking up, and I have a video coming up very soon with a message from our galactic family, so stay tuned.